Hello and welcome to Speak Up, Listen Up, Follow Up, the podcast from the National Guardian's office. In this series, we're exploring the role leaders play in fostering a healthy speaking up culture and making speaking up business as usual. In this, our third episode, Dr. Jayne Chidgey-Clark, National Guardian for the NHS, speaks to the Chief Executive and Deputy Chief Executive of NHS Providers, Chris Hopson and Saffron Cordery.
Initiatives and focus like this so that we can get to the heart of what's really going on.
In this episode, Chris and Saffron discuss Speaking Up's role in workforce retention in a post-pandemic NHS and how they will use Speak Up within their new roles. We hope you enjoy this episode, and now over to Jayne.
Good afternoon, Saffron and Chris. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon for this conversation around Speak Up, Listen Up, Follow Up, our NGO podcast. And I was wondering if I could kick off by asking you both what freedom to speak up means to you.
Shall I kick off?
Why don't you kick off?
Shall I kick off?
Why don't you kick off?
I will kick off. So I think freedom to speak up is absolutely fundamental because it's about the ability, particularly within a massive structure like the NHS, to be able to truth when things are going wrong, speak truth when things don't feel right within a very big and sometimes what probably feels like an overbearing hierarchy on occasions, and when it isn't always the case that it feels okay to speak up. So I think that it's really important that we have initiatives and focus like this so that we can get to the heart of what's really going on, particularly on the front line.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting answer, because the bit I think I'd lay alongside it is the fact that in healthcare, it feels to me to be and of our national life and our the way our national life runs, where there are some amazing things when you work in the service. It's amazing kind of being able to make a real difference in terms of the quality of care and the treatment that's provided. But it's also in terms of the quality of care and the treatment that's provided. But it's also healthcare is something where when things go wrong and when things aren't done correctly, actually the level of risk is much higher than it is virtually anywhere else. And where at its most extreme, if things are done wrong, people disabled long term. And I think in that environment where we're asking staff to do some pretty extraordinary things day in, day out, it's really important to have a process where if things go wrong, people have the ability to say, this has gone wrong, enables us to learn and to ensure that those things don't happen again. And, you know, it is very interesting about how many of the things that do go wrong potentially are avoidable, particularly the things that I find most distressing, I think, are the ones where actually they're repetitions of things that have happened before. And that's where it feels to me freedom to speak up is incredibly important. It's not just about kind of clinical care. There are some other things that kind of go on inside organisations. But for me, you know, that allowing people who are providing clinical care freedom to speak up if things have gone wrong feels really important given the nature of what people are doing.
Yeah, that's so helpful and a really great introduction. Well, I guess we're facing, and I've heard you speak about it from an NHS provider's perspective on many platforms, unprecedented pressures on the workforce currently. We're in a situation where post-pandemic there is a huge pressure on recovery and waiting lists, and we know that there is, a huge shortage, particularly in clinical staff, but not always just clinical staff. So I wondered if you see a role for freedom to speak up in workforce retention, and if you do, what that might be.
It's really important that we think about how we are supporting staff across the piece when we are thinking about operating at such high levels of intensity and high levels of real pressure, because I think that recovery point is absolutely correct. You know, we're focusing very heavily on recovery, but what we also know is that bits of our service, like the urgent and emergency care pathway, A&E departments, ambulances, and also bits of wider healthcare provision, like mental health services, for example, are under extreme pressure. And when roles are really pressurized, if we're going to attract people into those roles, they need to know that they will be safe psychologically and to be able to speak up if they feel that they need to. So I think that it's a really important structure to put round the workforce and to demonstrate to people who are thinking about joining or thinking about, you know, whether they should stay within the NHS, that is there for.
I think there's a really interesting challenge for us all at the moment about how we describe the current situation, in terms of there is absolutely no doubt that parts of the service are under huge, and lots of the service is under huge amounts of enormous pressure. I do think it's one of the things that we've really tried to do at NHS Providers is to actually also remind everybody of how much really, really great work is being done day in, day out across the service. It feels to me, and I think Saffron's, expressed it really, really well, that if you want this bit that is under extreme pressure, I think people feeling that they are working in a supportive environment, and where people feel that, because we know that what frontline staff say is that it's very distressing for them in terms of their inability to deliver the quality of care that they want, and at its worst, there being occasions when they are experiencing levels of potentially poor quality care that are having a real impact on patients. And I think a key part of asking people to work in that environment is that they must have the ability to flag where those instances occur, so that people can feel that it's been clearly registered. And particularly, as I said, if in my first answer, if there are things that we could do better and differently to avoid the next patient having poor quality care in the same way, people must feel psychologically safe, as Saffron said, to be able to raise that. So it feels to me a key part of providing work environment in which we are asking our staff to do some really difficult things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess I'd add to that, we talk about speaking up as though it's only the speaking up, but I know that we all know, but anyone listening to this podcast, I would like to just emphasise it's not just the speaking up, it's the listened to, and then appropriate actions are taken. So when I talk about speak up, I'm meaning it in its widest sense of speak up, listen up, and then follow up. And that's the important message for any leaders listening, in terms of, we need to ensure if we're going to be looking at workforce retention, this is a good place to work wherever it might be. Looking at workforce retention, this is a good place to work wherever it might be. It's the fact that if I do speak up about something that's getting in the way of me doing my role, then I'm providing safe care, or whatever my role in the organisation is, that it will be listened to, that I'll be thanked for having the courage to speak up, and then that someone's going to act accordingly on that. So your role as NHS providers is very much supporting leadership of organisations to be the best they can be, and I know you really support the Speak Up agenda. I guess I'm wondering, have you got any tips for leaders? And by leaders, I don't just mean the very senior parts of leadership within organisations, but leaders at all levels. Any tips for them keeping Speak Up at the top of their agenda? Because you're saying, all of us are agreeing that it's really important, but there are so many competing priorities out there in the NHS at the moment. So any tips for how leaders can keep freedom to speak up at the top of their agenda?
I mean, my kind of sense of it is that I hope people don't see it as one of a number of priorities that they need to put at the top of their list. I'd like people to think about it as something that they just embed in the way that they lead day in, day out. And just as being a leader is, for example, to listen very carefully to how you can support your staff to give of their best. Make sure that, surprise, surprise, their pay arrives on time. Make sure that they are taking their holiday and their leave appropriately. So for me, I'd like to see it really as this is just part of what it takes to be a good and effective leader, and it becomes as reflexive an action, as it were, if you're a leader, and it's built into the training, it's built into, just the way that, so that it's not sort of regarded as a add-on extra that needs to be towards the top of the list of priorities. It's just the way we do things around here.
Yeah, and I've got very little to add on that, apart from to say I think we really have to see it as an investment in the workforce and in the NHS. We know that workforce is absolutely critical. It's the biggest chunk of financial investment, and it's the biggest chunk of caring investment. So let's remember that it's about investing in the workforce.
Absolutely. I both those responses completely resonate with me, and that when we talk about making it business as usual, and if it's business as usual, it's not a priority because it's just fundamentally embedded in everything we do and the way we do things around here. I love that phraseology. Thank you. And those of you who are listening, I really hope that you take that as a bit of a takeaway back to your organisations and is current initiative, because we don't want it to be an initiative. It's been around for a long time now. Talking about speak up culture, and obviously that's much wider than just freedom to speak up guardians. That's about speaking up to your line manager, speaking up to HR, patient safety, the wider context of speaking up. So maybe I can move us on then, still thinking about the leadership piece, about our recent third piece of training follow-up, which is aimed at leadership at all levels. I'm wondering whether you feel it's important that leaders engage with this short piece of training.
I think it's fundamental. So we've just been talking about something which we could view as a hygiene factor in some ways, or a reflexive action. It's part of what we do around here, but in other ways you shouldn't assume that everyone has the skills immediately, or has the knowledge or understanding. Refreshing that and making sure that you're as up to date as you can be is absolutely fundamental. So that follow-up training, I think, from my perspective, is critical to keep it fresh and to keep it really effective.
Yeah, I think Jayne, I think I'm right in saying this. You can detect a note of hesitation in my voice, but effectively, I'm pretty certain there's management literature that shows really clearly that if people give feedback on something in a spirit of kind of willingness and having been encouraged and supported to do so, as I understand it, the way it works is if actually after one or two times or three times nothing is done about that feedback, then what happens is people stop giving the feedback. And the management literature is really clear, which effectively is that you can encourage and support people to speak up all you like, but if you're not actually doing something which then reflects that you've heard, and ideally that you as leaders have done the feedback loop and said, we heard this from you, have done about it, then very quickly people stop providing the feedback that you need. So if you regard this as basically embedding this in the way that we do things around here, there's an equally great responsibility to not just encourage and support speak up. You've got to listen, but crucially then do something about it, and I think tell people you've done something about it so that they can kind of see it. So that's why I think I really like your speak up, listen up, follow up, because speak up, listen up, follow up, because actually that is making that feedback loop work effectively, and that's how you really start to embed it in the culture and people seeing they're making a difference when they do it.
That's really helpful, and of course what that training we home organisations. So they do the training, it's short and sharp, but that's just the start of it. It's almost like a reset, freedom to speak up, and the whole movement has been around for a number of years now, since Sir Robert Francis's review, and so many trusts will have procedures, and will have people in position, and will have a way of doing things. But if you do this piece of training now, it's an opportunity to reset. Are we doing everything we can be doing? What were our staff telling us? If we look at our staff survey results, where it relates to confidence in speaking up, and crucially, as you've said, confidence that it's going to be acted on, how are we? And how are we, not just globally as a percentage across 18,000 staff, for example, how are we in that team over there? Because the problem with averages is it can mask some excellent performers and some not so excellent performers. So absolutely, what I'm hearing from you is that absolute support to do the training as a conversation. Are we doing enough to make sure that absolutely this is embedded and is our business as usual? The way we do things around here, Chris, that's I love that. Chris, congratulations, you're moving on to a new role in NHSEI as the Chief Strategy Officer, and congratulations, Saffron, because you're taking over, as the Interim Chief Exec within NHS Providers. But Chris, I was wondering first for you, and I'll ask the same question to you, Saffron, is how do you see the importance of Speak Up in your new role?
Well, I haven't started yet. At the point, it's really clear, isn't it, that one of NHS England's roles is to role model the behaviour and to encourage and support through what it does, but also what it brings to frontline leaders' attention and supports them to do it. It sets the tone and the culture for the service as a whole. So I do think it's really important that NHS England does everything it can to encourage this agenda, and also inside the organisation as a whole. I think it's also got one of the interesting things about NHS England, I think, is it's not just in that sense the leader of the system, but it's also a large and influential organisation in its own right, with a significant number of staff. And actually, you also need to ensure in that position that inside the organisation, for those staff who believe there is a need to do so. So on both of those counts, I think this is an important part of the NHS England agenda.
Brilliant. That's so good to hear, Chris. What about you, Saffron, taking over the reins as the new Chief Exec interim, for the importance for you in your role?
So I think what I will be doing in my new role is continuing our support for the Speaking Up agenda, and we have been long-standing friends of the whole structure and organisation, and we will continue to do that. And I think critically, we will continue to support trusts in their quest to encourage speaking up, and their support for guardians, and their support for the whole approach, because it is fundamental and it is really important. And it came out of the Francis review, which was action point really for the NHS, and we need to continue to focus on that.
Thank you so much, and it's great to know that as a leadership organisation supporting the NHS, that you'll continue that support. Thank you. Maybe just as a final question, I could ask you, do you have a Speak Up pledge that you would like to make today to our listeners?
Yeah, I'm very happy to kind of pledge to take the importance of this agenda into my new role at NHS England, and to ensure that in the teams that I've got direct line management responsibility for, I've assured myself that appropriate arrangements are in place and people feel comfortable and feel free to speak up in terms of the bit that I am formally responsible for.
Thank you so much, Chris. And Saffron?
I think my pledge is to continue to support trusts in their role and help them to really drive the Speaking Up agenda in their trusts at every level.
That's absolutely brilliant. Thank you both so much.
Thank you so much, Chris and Saffron, for taking the time to come on our podcast. Thank you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. Next time, Jayne will be joined by the Chief Executive and Registrar of the Nursing and Midwifery Council, Andrea Sutcliffe, CBE.
We've got to listen. I mean, all of the lessons of any of the reports that we've seen, it's not listening that has caused problems. And so we first of all got to say, we are listening.
Make sure you're subscribed so you never miss an episode. We welcome your feedback, so please like, rate and comment. Thanks for listening.